German POWs shocked to fall in love with the enemy. During World War II, I couldn't sleep that night, tossing and turning as I thought of my brother Klaus. The letter from the military had arrived earlier that day, informing us that his unit was engaged in heavy fighting in Sicily. My hands trembled as I lit the small oil lamp beside my bed, pulling out the last letter I'd received from him just 2 weeks ago. The paper was worn from my constant rereading, Klaus's neat handwriting describing the scorching Sicilian sun and the constant rumble of artillery. I touched the dried ink, feeling somehow closer to him through these written words. "Dearest Hilda," he had written. "The men look to me for strength, but some days I wonder if I have any left to give." Sleep was impossible now. I got up and walked to the window of our family home in Munich, watching the moonlight cast shadows across our small garden. How different it looked from the battlefield Klaus was facing. While I worried about keeping our vegetable patch alive, he worried about keeping his men alive. The sound of distant air raid sirens made me shudder. They had become so common now, but tonight they seemed to carry extra weight. Somewhere across the Mediterranean, my brother was fighting for his life. Was he huddled in a foxhole right now? Was he leading his men in another desperate charge? I remembered the day he left, standing tall in his crisp uniform, his captain's insignia gleaming. "I'll make you proud, Hilda," he had said, hugging me tightly. "I'll serve Germany with honor." But in his recent letters I'd noticed a change. The confidence had given way to weariness, though he tried to hide it. Returning to my bed, I pulled out my sewing basket, my constant companion during sleepless nights. My fingers worked automatically, mending a torn uniform, while my mind wandered to Sicily. The heat there must be unbearable, I thought, especially in those heavy Wehrmacht uniforms. Klaus had mentioned the dust that coated everything, the constant thirst, the exhaustion etched on his men's faces. A sudden burst of anti-aircraft fire lit up the sky outside my window. I pricked my finger with the needle and watched a small drop of blood well up. How much blood was being spilled on that distant battlefield? The thought made me sick with worry. I reached for Klaus's photograph on my nightstand, the one taken just before he left for North Africa. His face looked so young, so determined. Now, 2 years later, what would I see in those eyes? His letters spoke of battles and strategies, of duty and honor. But between the lines, I could read his growing doubts, his mounting fears. "Please, God," I whispered into the darkness, "keep him safe." But safety seemed like such a distant hope now. The news from Sicily was grim. Allied forces advancing, our troops falling back. Each day brought reports of more casualties, more captures. I got up again, this time to write. Perhaps putting my fears on paper would help ease them. "My dearest brother," I began, "I pray this letter finds you well." But what could I say? How could I offer comfort from so far away? The words wouldn't come, and I found myself staring at the blank page, just as I stared into the dark night, feeling helpless and afraid. The air raid sirens finally fell silent, but sleep remained elusive. I could only think of Klaus, somewhere under that same moon, fighting not just the enemy, but his own fears and doubts. My brave, proud brother. What battles was he facing right now? Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. I stared at the blank page before me, my hand trembling slightly as I held my pen. The morning light filtered through the window, casting a pale glow on my writing desk. Another sleepless night had passed, and still no word from Klaus. The uncertainty gnawed at me. A letter arrived yesterday from one of Klaus's fellow officers' wives. She shared what little information they had. Their husband's unit had been captured in Sicily. My heart ached thinking of my proud brother, now a prisoner of war. What hardships was he enduring? In my mind's eye, I could see him now, probably being transported like cargo in the back of some American truck. Klaus, who always stood so tall, who carried himself with such dignity, how was he bearing this humiliation? The thought of him being herded into holding areas like cattle made my stomach churn. I dabbed at my eyes with my handkerchief and tried to focus on writing my daily letter to him, though I had no idea where to send it now. "Dearest Klaus," I wrote, "I pray you're being treated with dignity." My hand paused. Were the Americans capable of showing dignity to their prisoners? All we'd heard about them from the propaganda made them sound like savages. Through my window, I could see Frau Weber hanging her laundry. Her son had been captured on the Eastern Front last year. We all knew what that meant. But the Americans, Surely they would follow the Geneva Convention? Klaus had mentioned in his letters that they seemed different from what we'd been told, but I couldn't be sure if that was just him trying to comfort me. I picked up his last letter, rereading his words about the American advance. Their efficiency is remarkable, he'd written, and their equipment. Hilda, I've never seen anything like it. Even then, I could sense his growing uncertainty about everything we'd been taught to believe. The church bells rang in the distance, marking another hour of uncertainty. I imagined Klaus in some processing center, surrounded by armed guards. Would they mock him? Abuse him? He was a proud man. How would he handle being stripped of his rank, his dignity? My teacup sat cold and untouched beside me as I continued writing. Remember, brother, that no matter what happens, you carry our family's honor with you. I thought about our present, a father's words before he passed. A Müller faces adversity with courage. Klaus had always lived by those words. A sudden knock at my door startled me. It was Maria, my neighbor, bringing news that more letters had arrived for other military families. Some prisoners were being shipped to America. America! The thought of Klaus being taken so far away made my heart sink even further. I returned to my letter, trying to pour all my love and strength into the words, hoping somehow they would reach him. Stay strong, Klaus, I wrote, my tears threatening to smudge the ink. Remember who you are, but also remember what you once told me, that sometimes the greatest courage is in knowing when to bend rather than break. The morning wore on as I sat at my desk, writing and rewriting, trying to find the right words to comfort a brother who might never read them. Outside, life in Munich continued, but my thoughts remained with Klaus, facing his first days of captivity across the sea. I carefully fold Klaus's latest letter in my hands, reading it for the third time. My brother's usually precise handwriting appears shaky, reflecting his state during the long journey across the Atlantic. He writes about being transported like cattle, yet there's something different in his tone, a hint of surprise perhaps. From my small apartment in Berlin, I can only imagine what he's going through. Klaus describes the crowded conditions on the ship, how the men are packed together in the hold, the constant rolling of the waves making many of them sick. My heart aches as I read about the meager rations, thin soup and hard bread, though Klaus notes it's more than they expected. Dearest sister, his letter reads, the Americans are different than what we were told. They haven't beaten us or starved us. One of them, a Sergeant Henderson, even helped Dieter when he was seasick, bringing him extra water. I touch the paper, where water spots have smudged some words. Whether from ocean spray or tears, I cannot tell. Klaus has always been too proud to admit to crying. The journey seems endless, he continues. Days blur together in the dark hold of the ship. Some men pray, others curse. I try to keep our unit's spirits up, but it's difficult when none of us knows where we're headed or what awaits us. I pause my reading to make some tea, my hands trembling slightly as I light the stove. Our parents would have known better how to comfort Klaus. But they're gone now, victims of the bombing in Hamburg, and I'm all he has left. Back at my small table, I return to his words. Strange, Hilda, but the Americans post guards more to protect us from the angry crew than to keep us confined. Yesterday, a sailor tried to spit on Werner, and an American soldier stepped between them. I don't understand it. Are they truly this soft, or is it some trick? The letter goes on to describe their arrival in New York. Klaus writes of seeing the Statue of Liberty through a porthole, a sight that filled him with both awe and bitterness. To see such grandeur while in chains, sister, though they're not real chains. They barely even bind our hands anymore. His final paragraphs detail the train journey to somewhere called Kansas. The American heartland, he writes, endless fields of wheat under vast skies. The soldiers guarding us look bored rather than hostile. One even shared his coffee with me this morning. Real coffee, Hilda, not the weak substitute we've had for years. I don't know what to make of it all, Klaus concludes. Everything I believed about these Americans seems wrong, yet I cannot afford to trust. A soldier must remain vigilant, even in captivity. Still, there is something here I cannot explain. I set the letter down and walk to my window, looking out at the bomb-damaged buildings of Berlin. Somewhere across the ocean, my brother is questioning everything he's been taught to believe. I recognize the confusion in his words, the same confusion I feel when I see the Americans dropping food packages instead of bombs in some parts of the city. Perhaps, I think as I begin to compose my reply, this war has more to teach us than we ever expected. I anxiously read my brother's latest letter from Camp Concordia, his familiar handwriting filling the pages with details of his first day there. Through his words, I could picture every moment as if I were there with him. The heavy iron gates of Camp Concordia creaked open as the trucks rolled through. Klaus and the other prisoners stood shoulder to shoulder, swaying with each bump in the dirt road. My brother's legs felt weak after the long journey, but he forced himself to stand straight, keeping his dignity intact as a German officer. Towering watchtowers cast long shadows across the dusty Kansas ground. Rows of wooden barracks stretched out before them, surrounded by double layers of barbed wire that glinted in the morning sun. American soldiers with rifles stood at attention, their eyes following every movement. "Raus! Everyone out!" The command came in, broken German. Klaus's boots hit the ground, sending up small clouds of dust. His stomach churned with dread as he took in his surroundings. The heat was different here, dry and intense, nothing like the humid warmth of our homeland. Other prisoners stumbled out behind him, their faces showing the same mix of exhaustion and fear that I knew must be on his face. A tall American officer approached, his uniform crisp despite the dust and heat. This was Colonel Harrison, the camp commandant. Klaus wrote that he expected harsh words, maybe even violence, the treatment they'd been warned about in their military training. Instead, the colonel's voice was firm but measured as he addressed them through an interpreter. "You are now prisoners of war at Camp Concordia," Colonel Harrison announced. "You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Follow the rules, and you will be treated fairly." Klaus described how his fellow officers exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the reception they had steeled themselves for. American soldiers began directing them toward the processing area, their gestures clear but not aggressive. The mess hall surprised them most. Instead of the meager rations they expected, they received real food, hot soup, bread, and even coffee. Klaus wrote how his hands trembled slightly as he held the warm bowl, the rich smell making his stomach growl. He hadn't had a proper meal in days. "Eat," said one of the American guards, nodding toward the food. "There's enough for everyone." The prisoners sat at long wooden tables, the metal spoons clicking against their bowls in nervous silence. Klaus watched as some of his men hesitated, perhaps wondering if this was some cruel joke. But the food was real, and no one came to snatch it away. After the meal, they were shown to their barracks. Clean bunks lined the walls, each with a thin but adequate mattress and blanket. There were even small windows letting in strips of sunlight. The building was simple but sturdy, offering protection from the elements, far better than the conditions they'd endured on the battlefield. Klaus wrote that he lay in his bunk that first night, unable to sleep despite his exhaustion. His mind kept circling back to the same question. Why were they being treated this way? Everything he'd been told about American brutality seemed at odds with what he was experiencing. The cognitive dissonance made him uncomfortable, challenging beliefs he'd held as absolute truths. I could feel his confusion in every word he wrote, sense how this unexpected kindness had shaken him more deeply than any cruelty could have. I sit at my desk in our small apartment in Munich, staring at the blank paper before me. The evening light casts long shadows across the wooden surface as I struggle to find the right words to write to my brother Klaus. My hands tremble, slightly as I pick up my pen, remembering his last letter describing his capture in Sicily. Finally, I begin writing. "Dearest Klaus, I pray this letter finds you well. Mother and I think of you constantly." I pause, dabbing at my eyes with my handkerchief. Through the thin walls, I can hear our neighbor's radio crackling with news from the front. I try to imagine where Klaus might be now. Is he cold? Hungry? Are they treating him with dignity? The letter from the Red Cross arrived yesterday, confirming he was being held at a place called Camp Concordia in America. Such a strange name, I think. Concordia. It means harmony. Yet how can there be harmony in a prison camp? I continue writing, telling him about home, about Mother's garden, and how the roses he planted before leaving are blooming beautifully this year. I want to fill the letter with normal things, peaceful things, to give him something to hold on to. A commotion outside draws me to the window. Children are playing in the street, their laughter a stark contrast to the worried faces of their mothers watching from doorways. The war feels closer every day, even here in Munich. I touch the silver cross necklace Klaus gave me before he left, remembering his proud smile in his uniform that day. Back at my desk, I write about hearing from his old friend Hans, who runs the bakery down the street. I don't mention the bombing raids or how we spend nights in the cellar now. Klaus has enough to worry about. I hope they are treating you well, I write, then hesitate. What if they read his mail? Would showing concern for his treatment make things worse for him? I leave the sentence as it is. My fingers trace the edges of his last letter, sent before his capture. His words were full of duty and honor, but I could read between the lines, the exhaustion, the horror of what he'd seen. Now, in American hands, was he finally safe from the fighting at least? I add a few more lines about the family, trying to keep my tone cheerful despite the ache in my heart. Remember what Father always said. I write, that true strength lies not in hatred but in understanding. Stay strong, dear brother. Keep your heart open, even now. The setting sun reminds me that curfew is approaching. I need to finish the letter soon if I want to mail it tomorrow. Outside, mothers are calling their children inside, their voices echoing off the buildings. I close with our usual family blessing, adding extra prayers for his safety and well-being. Before sealing the envelope, I tuck in a small photo of Mother in her garden, something to remind him of home, of who he is beyond the uniform and the war. As I prepare the envelope, I wonder how long it will take to reach him. This little piece of home traveling across an ocean to wherever they're keeping him. Will he recognize the hope and fear mixed in my careful words? Will he understand that no matter what happens, he is still my brother, still loved? The church bells ring the evening hour as I finish addressing the envelope. I hold it close for a moment, as if I could somehow transfer all my love and worry into the paper itself, before placing it carefully in my desk drawer for mailing tomorrow. I unfold Klaus's latest letter with trembling hands. His neat handwriting fills the page, describing his daily life at Camp Concordia. My brother, always so precise in his descriptions, tells me about his new assignment in the camp's laundry facility. Dearest Hilda, he writes, today was different. I worked alongside one of the American sergeants. Henderson is his name. He tries to speak our language, though his German is quite poor. Strange how the enemy attempts to bridge this gap between us. I can picture Klaus's tall figure, standing stiffly as he folds the endless piles of uniforms and linens. The image makes me smile despite my worry. My proud brother, a Panzer Division captain, reduced to doing laundry. The sergeant speaks of simple things. Klaus continues. The weather, the work, his home in Texas. I find myself responding, though I tell myself I shouldn't. When he stumbled over the German word for sheet, I corrected him without thinking. He thanked me with such genuine appreciation that for a moment, I almost forgot. His words trail off there, a small ink blot marking his hesitation. I touch the spot gently, imagining him pausing, pen hovering over the paper as he struggled with his conflicting emotions. The work is monotonous, he writes, but preferable to sitting idle in the barracks. Henderson works alongside us, not just supervising. He showed me how they prefer their uniforms folded, so particular, these Americans. I caught myself almost smiling at his earnest attempts to pronounce Unterwäsche. Reading between the lines, I sense Klaus's confusion. His carefully constructed walls are beginning to show cracks, and I'm not sure if he's more bothered by the Americans' kindness or his own response to it. Something unexpected happened at the end of our shift, Klaus writes. I mentioned, without thinking, that the rations seemed smaller than usual. Henderson disappeared for a few minutes. When he returned, he had an extra portion of food. He insisted I take it, Hilda. I refused at first. My pride wouldn't allow it. But he was so matter-of-fact about it, as if helping a German prisoner was the most natural thing in the world. My heart swells reading this. I remember Father's words about how the smallest acts of kindness can breach the widest divides. Klaus continues. I accepted the food finally. The shame of taking charity from the enemy warred with my hunger. But there was no mockery in Henderson's eyes, no superiority, just kindness. I don't know what to make of it. I press the letter to my chest, feeling tears well up in my eyes. My brother, who left for war so certain of his convictions, now sounds lost and confused. But perhaps this confusion is a blessing in disguise. Perhaps it's the first step towards seeing our enemies as human beings. I find myself dreading tomorrow's shift less, Klaus admits in his final paragraph. Though I tell myself it's just because the work helps pass the time. But Hilda, how do I reconcile this? How do I hate men who show such unexpected decency? I fold the letter carefully, understanding the turmoil in my brother's words. The war has taught us to see everything in black and white, but Klaus is discovering shades of gray in the most unexpected place, a prison camp's laundry room. I stand in our modest home in Hamburg, reading Klaus's latest letter for the 10th time. His words seem different now, less rigid, less certain. My brother's handwriting flows across the thin paper, speaking of unexpected kindnesses at Camp Concordia. It's so unlike the propaganda we hear daily about American brutality. Through the window, I watch people hurrying past, their faces drawn with worry. The war has changed everyone, even Klaus. In his letters, I sense a transformation happening thousands of miles away. He writes about an American sergeant who speaks broken German, about decent meals and fair treatment. These aren't the stories we're meant to hear. Today's letter troubles me deeply. Klaus hints at growing tensions in the camp. Some of his fellow prisoners, he writes, cannot accept their captors' humanity. They see kindness as weakness, mercy as manipulation. Between the carefully chosen words, I sense my brother's turmoil. They speak of resistance, he writes, of showing these Americans what German soldiers are made of. But Hilda, I cannot help but think of Sergeant Henderson's face when he shared his rations with me. How can I reconcile these conflicting truths? I fold the letter and press it to my chest, feeling Klaus's anguish across the ocean. My fingers trace the worn edges of earlier letters, each one showing his gradual change from bitter defeat to confused gratitude. Now, he stands at a crossroads, torn between loyalty to his comrades and an unexpected debt to his captors. Setting the letter on my sewing table, I pick up my work, another uniform that needs mending. The fabric beneath my fingers reminds me of all the soldiers like Klaus, caught between duty and conscience. While I stitch, I think of my brother's predicament. He mentions overheard conversations, whispered plans in dark corners of the barracks. The other prisoners call the Americans soft, claiming their kindness makes them vulnerable. Klaus's words haunt me. If I speak up, I betray my brothers in arms. If I stay silent, I betray something else. Perhaps something larger than national loyalty. I don't know what to do, Hilda. For the first time, I question everything I thought I knew about this war. The setting sun casts long shadows across my workroom as I consider my response. What can I tell him? That honor isn't always found where we expect it? That sometimes the enemy proves to be more human than our own side would have us believe? I see Klaus in my mind's eye, pacing his barracks at Camp Concordia, weighing his options. Should he report the brewing trouble to the American authorities? Should he remain silent and loyal to his fellow Germans? The weight of his decision feels heavy even here, across an ocean. My hands still over the uniform I'm mending. Through all our years together, I've never known Klaus to waver in his convictions. Yet now, in this foreign land, surrounded by men who should be his enemies, he questions everything. The Americans' simple acts of decency have done what years of warfare couldn't. They've shown him another way of seeing the world. I put down my sewing and move to my writing desk. Klaus needs an answer. But what can I say? How do I help him navigate between betrayal and conscience, between the past he knows and the truth he's discovering? The blank paper before me offers no answers, only the space to share his burden. The letter felt heavy in my hands as I read Klaus's words for the 3rd time. My dear brother, always so dutiful, now wrote of something that troubled his conscience. I could sense his inner turmoil through the carefully penned sentences, each word carrying the weight of his conflicted heart. Dearest Klaus, I whispered, composing my response in my mind before putting pen to paper. Your last letter speaks of the kindness you've witnessed in the American camp. I remember how you once told me they would be monsters, yet now you describe their humanity with such wonder. I paused, thinking of how to address his concerns about the growing discord among his fellow prisoners. Klaus had written about a group of officers who couldn't accept their captors' decency, who saw it as weakness to be exploited. My brother's words revealed his struggle, torn between loyalty to his comrades and an awakening sense of respect for the Americans. The sergeant you mentioned, Henderson, seems to be a good man. I continued, writing. You wrote of how he shares extra rations, teaches English to those who want to learn, and treats you all with dignity. Perhaps God has placed you there for a reason, dear brother. Maybe this is a test of character rather than one of loyalty. I thought back to Klaus's descriptions of Camp Concordia. He'd written about the clean barracks, the decent food, and the fair treatment, all so different from the horror stories we'd heard about prisoner camps. Through his letters, I could see how these simple acts of kindness had begun to crack the shell of hatred he'd built around himself. "Remember what Father taught us," I wrote, my hand steady despite the emotion welling up inside me. "He always said that true strength lies not in blind loyalty, but in doing what is right, even when it costs us dearly. If these men plot violence against those who have shown you mercy, can you truly stand by and watch?" The morning light streamed through my window as I continued writing, trying to give my brother the guidance he seemed to be seeking. "You write of your fear of betraying your fellow soldiers, but consider this. By preventing violence, you may be saving not just the Americans, but also our own men from terrible consequences. Isn't that a form of loyalty too?" I could almost see Klaus pacing in his barracks, wrestling with his conscience. His latest letter had described hours spent watching Sergeant Henderson interact with the prisoners, showing patience with their broken English, listening to their concerns, treating them as human beings rather than enemies. These observations seemed to torment my brother, challenging everything he'd been taught to believe about the enemy. "My dearest brother," I concluded, "in times like these, we must look into our hearts and find the courage to act according to our conscience. The world has enough hatred already. Perhaps your American captors are showing you a different path. Remember what Mother always said. Even in war, we must not lose our humanity." I sealed the letter, praying it would reach Klaus in time to help him make the right choice. Whatever he decided, I wanted him to know that his sister understood the weight of his burden. We had both been raised to believe in duty and honor, but sometimes the truest duty was to our own moral compass. The morning light caught the moisture in my eyes as I headed to post my letter. I couldn't help but think that somewhere in Kansas, my brother was watching another sunrise, trying to find his way through this moral maze, and I hoped my words would give him the strength to choose wisely. The letter trembled in my hands as I read the news from Camp Concordia. My dear brother Klaus, always so proud and strong, was now in solitary confinement. The American guards had allowed this one letter to reach me, and my heart ached with every word I read. "Dearest Klaus," I whispered, tracing my fingers over his familiar handwriting. The paper was thin, covered in his neat, cramped script. He wrote about his choice to warn the Americans about some terrible plot, and now he sat alone in a small cell, cut off from everyone. I could picture him there, my strong older brother, the one who always protected me when we were children. Now he sat in darkness, probably questioning everything he believed in. The letter spoke of his confusion, his inner battle between loyalty to his fellow soldiers and doing what he felt was right. "The Americans," he wrote, "they are not what we were told, sister. They show kindness when they could show cruelty. They offer friendship when they could offer hate. I don't understand it, but I couldn't let harm come to them, not after everything they've done for us." My tears fell onto the paper as I read how they fed him regular meals, even in his punishment. How the guard, someone called Sergeant Henderson, would check on him daily. It wasn't the harsh treatment we had been warned about, nothing like the horror stories we'd heard about Allied captors. Klaus described his cell, IS, small but clean, with a narrow bed and a tiny window that let in a strip of sunlight. He wrote about spending hours watching that beam of light move across the floor, thinking about everything that had led him here, about the shame he felt for betraying his fellow prisoners, but also the growing certainty that he had done the right thing. "I'm writing another letter," he told me, "to Sergeant Henderson. He's been different from the start, Hilda. He treated us like men, not animals. When I see him watching me being led to the exercise yard, there's concern in his eyes, not hatred. I need to explain to him why I did what I did." I could feel Klaus's struggle in every word. My brother, who had always been so certain about everything, was now questioning all he had been taught to believe. The letter spoke of his sleepless nights, of lying awake trying to reconcile his duty as a German officer with this new understanding of humanity. "The solitude is both a curse and a blessing," he wrote. "In the quiet, I can finally hear my own thoughts clearly. Each day, I become more certain that this punishment is worth it. I couldn't have lived with myself if I had stayed silent and allowed violence to destroy the strange peace we've found here." My hands shook as I read about his decision to write to Sergeant Henderson. Klaus described wanting to explain himself, to help the American understand that this wasn't just about preventing sabotage. It was about choosing a different path, one that led away from hatred and towards something better. "I don't know if he'll read it," Klaus confessed in his letter to me. "But I have to try, sister. I have to make him understand that something has changed in me, that in trying to be loyal to my fellow Germans, I would have betrayed something more important, my own conscience. I held the letter close to my heart, feeling both pride and fear for my brother. He was alone in that cell, but his words showed me that he had found something valuable in his captivity, a kind of freedom that had nothing to do with physical walls or barbed wire. I stare at my brother's latest letter, dated 3 weeks ago, my heart heavy with worry. The thin paper trembles in my hands as I read his words again, trying to picture him in that American prison camp in Kansas. His usually precise handwriting looks shaky, revealing the turmoil beneath his composed words. "Dearest Hilda," he writes, "I find myself in a situation I never expected. The Americans, they are not what we were told. Their kindness confuses me. Today, I made a choice that has landed me in solitary confinement, but I know in my heart it was right." I pressed the letter to my chest, remembering how Klaus and I would sit in our family garden in Munich, sharing our dreams before the war changed everything. He was always the protective older brother, strong and certain in his convictions. But now, his words speak of doubt and inner conflict. Through his letters, I've watched his transformation. At first, his messages were filled with anger and distrust toward his captors, but gradually, something changed. He wrote of an American sergeant named Henderson, who showed him unexpected kindness, of decent meals, and humane treatment that challenged everything he believed about the enemy. The hatred they taught us, he writes, "It feels hollow now. Yesterday, I prevented something terrible from happening. Some of my fellow prisoners planned to harm the Americans. I couldn't let it happen, Hilda. Not after seeing their humanity. Now I sit alone in this cell, wondering if I betrayed my comrades or finally found my conscience. I wipe away tears, remembering our last conversation before he left for the front. Stay strong, he had told me. Whatever happens, remember who we are." But now, in this letter, I see him questioning everything he once held certain. He describes his cell, small but clean, with a narrow cot and a small window that lets in strips of Kansas sunlight. The solitude weighs on him, but he finds unexpected peace in it too. "In this quiet," he writes, "I can finally hear my own thoughts clearly. The war stripped away so much of our humanity, Hilda. Here, in this American camp, I'm finding pieces of myself I thought were lost forever." My fingers trace his words about Sergeant Henderson, the American who showed him kindness from the beginning. "Even now, in my punishment, they treat me with dignity. The sergeant brings me my meals himself, speaking to me in broken German, asking if I'm well. How can I reconcile this with everything we were taught to believe?" I fold the letter carefully, my thoughts drifting to our childhood home, now partially destroyed by Allied bombing. Yet here is my brother, experiencing compassion from these same allies. War makes everything complicated, blurring the lines between friend and enemy. Klaus's words haunt me. I feel lost between two worlds, sister, the soldier I was taught to be, and the man I'm becoming. Sometimes I wonder what father would think of me now. Would he understand that I chose humanity over blind loyalty? I reach for paper and pen, knowing my response must carry all the love and support I can give him across the ocean. My brother sits alone in his cell, wrestling with his conscience, and all I can do is send him words of comfort and understanding. In times like these, sometimes that's all we have. Words bridging the distance, carrying hope across borders and battle lines. I sit at my desk in Stuttgart, carefully unfolding Klaus's latest letter. His words, written in his familiar neat handwriting, tell a story that brings tears to my eyes, not of sadness, but of hope. "Dearest Hilda," he writes, "today marked my first day back among the general population after my time in solitary. I know you worry about me, but please don't. The Americans here, they continue to surprise me in ways I never thought possible." I traced my fingers over his words, remembering my little brother as the proud soldier who left for war. His letter continues, describing how he joined a maintenance detail with several American soldiers, including the one he's mentioned before, Sergeant Henderson. "We were fixing a broken fence," Klaus writes, "and I found myself working shoulder to shoulder with men I once considered enemies. There was no tension, no hatred, just the shared task at hand. Henderson handed me tools without hesitation, trusted me with a hammer and nails. Can you imagine that, sister? Such trust, after everything?" I pause, dabbing at my eyes with my handkerchief. Klaus's words paint a vivid picture of life in Camp Concordia, so different from what we'd feared when we first learned of his capture. The strangest thing happened during our lunch break, his letter continues. Henderson shared his coffee with me, real coffee. Hilda, not the weak substitute we've grown used to. We sat in the shade of a building, and for the first time, I truly talked with him. Not as prisoner and guard, but as two men who have seen too much of war. My heart aches as I read about their conversation. Klaus describes how Henderson spoke of his family in Texas, of his wife's letters, and of the simple life he left behind. In return, Klaus shared stories about our childhood in Stuttgart, about Mama's apple strudel, and Papa's workshop. I found myself telling him about you, dear sister, Klaus writes, about your skill with a needle and thread, and how you always mended my torn shirts without complaint. Henderson listened with genuine interest, showing me a photo of his own sister back home. In that moment, the war seemed so senseless, so far away. The letter goes on to detail their deeper discussion. We talked about the war itself, Klaus confides, not as enemies discussing strategy, but as men wondering how we ended up here. Henderson said something that struck me deeply. War makes enemies of men who might have been friends in another life. I couldn't help but agree. His words grow more reflective. I look at these American soldiers now, Hilda, and I no longer see what our propaganda taught us to see. I see men like myself, following orders, trying to survive, missing their families. Henderson told me he never wanted to be a soldier. He wanted to be a schoolteacher. How many others had different dreams before the war changed everything? The sun is setting outside my window as I read the final paragraphs. Klaus describes how the day ended with a simple handshake between him and Henderson. It wasn't much, he writes, but it felt like a bridge being built over a vast divide. I'm not the same man who was captured in Sicily, sister. These Americans, with their unexpected kindness, have shown me that humanity exists, even in the darkest of times. I hold the letter close to my heart, grateful for the changes I see in my brother's words. The hatred and bitterness that colored his early letters have given way to something else. Prass, understanding, perhaps even hope. Through his eyes, I too am learning to see our so-called enemies differently. I sat at my kitchen table, reading Klaus's latest letter from Camp Concordia. My hands trembled as I held the paper, his familiar handwriting bringing both comfort and concern. The sun streamed through my window, casting long shadows across the worn wooden surface as I absorbed every word. Dearest Hilda, he wrote, something happened today that I must share with you, though I hardly know how to put it into words. My brother went on to describe how the morning had started like any other at the camp. The air was crisp, and the POWs were going about their usual work details. One of their fellow prisoners, Hans Weber, had been battling a severe fever for days. Klaus wrote about how an American medic, Private Johnson, had been checking on Hans regularly, bringing him medicine and extra water. The crisis began. Klaus's letter continued, when Hans collapsed during the morning roll call. Private Johnson rushed to help without hesitation, even though some of the other POWs were still hostile toward him. As he tried to lift Hans, Johnson lost his footing on the muddy ground. He fell awkwardly, and we heard a sickening crack. His arm had broken in the fall. My heart raced as I read on. Klaus described how he had watched, frozen for a moment, as both men lay there, the American soldier in obvious pain, and Hans barely conscious. The other POWs stood back, uncertain what to do, their ingrained hatred of the Americans warring with basic human decency. In that moment, sister, Klaus wrote, I saw something so clearly. Here was this American, who had risked himself to help one of us, the enemy. How could I stand by and do nothing? I could picture my brother, always so proper and controlled, breaking ranks to help. He described kneeling beside Private Johnson, using his basic medical training from the Wehrmacht to stabilize the broken arm with pieces of wood from a nearby crate. Other American guards had rushed over, but instead of pushing Klaus away, they worked alongside him to help both their fallen comrade and Hans. The look in Private Johnson's eyes, Hilda. There was no hatred there, even through his pain. He thanked me, called me friend. Me, a German officer who had fought against his countrymen just months ago. Klaus's words grew more introspective as he described the aftermath. How the other POWs had stared at him with a mixture of shock and disapproval. How the American guards had nodded to him with newfound respect. But most importantly, how something had shifted inside him. All these years, he wrote, we were taught to see them as our enemies, as less than human. But today, I saw the truth. Humanity knows no uniform, no nationality. The American soldier didn't see a German when he went to help Hans. He saw a person in need. And when I helped him, I didn't see an American. I saw a brave man who had gotten hurt trying to help another. A tear fell onto the letter, smudging the ink slightly. My brother, who had always been so certain of his path, so dedicated to his duty, was changing. Through his words, I could feel the profound impact this moment had had on him. I don't know what to believe anymore, Hilda, his letter concluded. Everything I was so sure of seems to be crumbling. But perhaps that's not such a bad thing. Perhaps it's time to rebuild on a foundation of something stronger than hatred. My hands trembled as I read Klaus's latest letter. The paper was thin, almost translucent, and his usually neat handwriting seemed rushed, unsteady. My dear brother wrote about an incident at Camp Concordia that had changed everything for him. Dearest Hilda, the letter began, I find myself in a strange position here. Yesterday, I helped save an American soldier's life. Can you believe it? The same men I once considered enemies. I don't know what to think anymore. I had to pause, dabbing at my eyes with my apron. Klaus had always been so certain, so unwavering in his beliefs. Now, his words carried doubt and confusion, but also something else, a warmth I hadn't seen since before the war. He described how the other German prisoners had turned their backs on him during meals. They whisper traitor when I walk past, he wrote. The men I once commanded now refuse to meet my eyes, especially Schmidt and Weber. They were my most trusted officers, but now they treat me like I'm invisible. My heart ached for him. I could picture Klaus sitting alone at the mess hall, the same proud posture he'd maintained since childhood, but now it was a shield against isolation rather than a mark of authority. The other prisoners had created an invisible wall around him, punishment for choosing humanity over hatred. But then Klaus's letter took a surprising turn. The Americans, though, they're different, Hilda. Sergeant Henderson brought me an extra blanket last night, said the desert gets cold, and Major Thompson stopped by personally to thank me for helping their injured man. They show more loyalty to someone who was their enemy than my own compatriots do now. I could feel Klaus's pain and confusion bleeding through his words. Sometimes I catch myself smiling at their jokes, he admitted. Henderson speaks terrible German, but he tries so hard. Yesterday, he managed to tell me about his family farm in Texas. I found myself telling him about our childhood in Munich, about you and your seamstress shop. The letter grew more personal, more vulnerable. I feel lost, sister. Everything I believed about these men, about this war, it's crumbling. When that American soldier was injured, I didn't see an enemy. I saw a young man, not so different from me, who needed help. Was I wrong to aid him? The other prisoners seemed to think so. But even as Klaus described his isolation, there was a thread of peace in his words. The strange thing is, Hilda, I don't regret it. Each cold shoulder from my former comrades reminds me that I chose to save a life rather than let hatred win. The Americans nod to me now when they pass. They see me as a person, not just a prisoner. Perhaps that's worth more than the approval of men who can't let go of their anger. Reading between the lines, I could sense my brother's transformation. The war had hardened him, but now something else was happening. A softening. A return to the gentle boy I'd known before all this began. His letter ended with a question that brought tears to my eyes. Am I betraying our country by finding humanity in these men, dear sister? Or am I finally becoming the person our mother always hoped we'd be? I clutched the letter to my chest, wishing I could reach across the ocean and hold my brother's hand. His isolation must be unbearable, but in his words, I heard not just loneliness, but also the first, tentative steps toward something greater than the divisions of war. I clutched the letter in my trembling hands, reading Klaus's words for the 100th time. The paper has grown soft from my constant handling, but I can't help myself. My dear brother's transformation shines through every carefully penned line. Dearest Hilda, he writes, the news of Germany's surrender has reached us here at Camp Concordia. I know you must be worried about how I'm taking it, but please don't be. The strange truth is, I feel relief, not just for the end of fighting, but because this captivity has taught me more about humanity than all my years of military service. Tears blur my vision as I settle into my favorite chair by the window. Outside, spring has come to Berlin, though the city still bears the scars of war. Like my brother, it too must find a way to heal. You wouldn't recognize me now, sister. Klaus's letter continues. The proud, angry man who left for war believing in the superiority of our cause. He's gone. In his place is someone who has learned that kindness knows no uniform, and that the enemy we were taught to hate shows more humanity than I could have imagined. I remember the early letters, full of bitterness and shame at his capture. How different they are from these recent ones, where he speaks of the American soldiers with respect, even friendship, especially this Sergeant Henderson and Major Thompson he mentions so often. Today, Major Thompson called me to his office. Klaus writes, he told me that with Germany's surrender, they're beginning to process releases for POWs. He offered to write me a letter of recommendation, Hilda. Me, a German captain who once saw him as an enemy. The kindness of it nearly broke me. I pause reading, dabbing at my eyes with my handkerchief. The war has changed us all, but Klaus's transformation seems almost miraculous. Through his letters, I've watched my brother's heart soften, his rigid beliefs crumble in the face of unexpected compassion. I find myself torn, his letter continues. Part of me longs to return home to you and start rebuilding our lives, but another part feels afraid. How do I return to Germany carrying these new truths? How do I reconcile the man I've become with the world I left behind? The American's decency has awakened something in me I didn't know was sleeping. Setting down the letter, I walk to my window and look out at the ruins of our city. I understand Klaus's fears. Germany will need to rebuild more than just its buildings. We'll need to rebuild our hearts and minds too. Perhaps my brother's experience, painful as it has been, will help light the way forward. I return to his letter, reading the final paragraphs. Major Thompson says I've earned this recommendation through my conduct here. But the truth is, sister, whatever good they see in me now exists because they first showed it to me. They could have treated us with cruelty. Instead, they chose humanity. It's a lesson I'll carry forever. The paper trembles in my hands as I fold it carefully and tuck it away with his other letters. My brother went to war, a soldier, but he's coming home, a changed man. And in his transformation, I see hope, not just for Klaus, but for all of us, who must find our way forward after these dark years. The evening light filters through my window as I unfold another letter from Klaus. My hands tremble slightly as I smooth out the creased paper. His letters have changed so much over these past months, from bitter and angry to something softer, more reflective. This one feels different even before I begin reading. Dearest Hilda, it begins. Today I did something I never thought possible. I wrote a letter to an American, not just any American, but to Sergeant Henderson, the man who showed me what true kindness means. I pause, remembering how Klaus used to speak of Americans with such venom in his voice. A tear wells up in my eye as I continue reading. I told Sergeant Henderson everything, sister. How I arrived at Camp Concordia full of hate and suspicion. How I expected the worst from our captors. But most importantly, I told him how his simple acts of decency changed me forever. Klaus's neat handwriting fills the pages, telling me how he spent hours crafting the perfect words to express his gratitude. He describes sitting at a small desk in the barracks, crossing out line after line until the words felt right. I wrote about that first day when he offered me a cigarette, such a small gesture that meant so much. About the extra portions of food he would sometimes slip to us. About the way he spoke to us like men, not animals. I told him how these acts of kindness slowly chipped away at the wall of hatred I had built around my heart. My brother's words paint a vivid picture of his transformation. He writes of how difficult it was to admit his changed feelings, even to himself. It feels like betrayal sometimes, Hilda. But then I remember that the real betrayal would be to deny the truth I've discovered here, that humanity exists on both sides of any conflict. I wipe away tears as I read about his struggles with this letter. Every word I wrote felt like both a confession and a liberation, he tells me. I thanked him for showing me that enemies can become friends, that compassion can survive even in times of war. Klaus describes sealing the envelope with shaking hands, knowing that once sent, there would be no taking back these admissions. I stood there for the longest time, sister, just holding that letter. Everything I've learned, everything I've become in this place, seemed to be contained in those pages. His words grow more uncertain as he describes waiting for a response. I don't know if he'll write back, Hilda. Perhaps it doesn't matter. What matters is that I finally found the courage to express my gratitude to the man who helped me rediscover my humanity. the letter continues, but I have to. Pause. Overwhelmed by emotion. This is my brother, my proud, stubborn brother, admitting to such a profound change of heart. Through his words, I can feel both his vulnerability and his strength in this moment of truth. The war may be ending soon, he writes, but I will carry these lessons with me forever. Whatever happens next, I know I am no longer the same man who arrived at Camp Concordia, and for that, I owe Sergeant Henderson more than I can ever repay. I hold the letter close to my heart, feeling closer to my brother than I have in years. Though miles separate us, I can sense his transformation through these pages, and I thank God that even in the midst of war, such healing is possible. I stand at our family home's window, watching Klaus walk slowly through our garden. The war has changed him. I can see it in the way he moves, in how his shoulders seem lighter despite everything he's been through. My brother came back to us different from the proud soldier who left for war years ago. The morning sun catches on the dew-covered roses I've tended while he was gone. Klaus pauses to touch one, gentle in a way I never expected from him. Back before the war, he would march past these flowers without a second glance, focused only on his military duties. The Americans taught me to appreciate beauty again, he tells me later as we sit at our worn kitchen table. His hands wrap around the chipped teacup, one of the few things that survived the bombing raids. They showed me kindness when I expected cruelty. I reach across and squeeze his hand. Tell me more about them, Klaus. About the camp. His eyes grow distant, but not with the haunted look I've seen in other returning soldiers. There was this American sergeant, Henderson. He spoke terrible German. Klaus actually smiles, something I haven't seen since his return 3 days ago. But he tried. He would bring extra food sometimes, teach us English words. They treated us like humans, Hilda, not enemies. The morning light streams through our patched curtains as Klaus continues. I was so angry at first, filled with hate. But day by day, their decency wore away at my certainty. How could I keep hating them when they showed such humanity? I listen as he describes the camp, the daily routines, the gradual transformation of his heart. My brother's voice grows stronger as he speaks about learning to trust again, about finding friendship in the most unexpected place. The war destroyed so much, I say softly, looking at our damaged neighborhood through the window. But perhaps it taught us something too. Klaus nods, his expression thoughtful. I learned that kindness is not weakness. The Americans could have treated us harshly. We were their enemies. Instead, they chose compassion. That takes more strength than hatred ever did. He pulls a worn piece of paper from his pocket, a letter from Sergeant Henderson. He writes to me still. Says his door is always open if I ever visit. America. Klaus's voice catches. After everything we did, after all the fighting, they still offered friendship. I watch my brother as he carefully folds the letter. His hands, once so quick to clench into fists, now move with gentle purpose. The war has left its marks on him. Yes, but not all scars are wounds. Some are lessons learned, wisdom earned through pain and unexpected grace. What will you do now? I ask, pouring him more tea. Help rebuild. He answers without hesitation. Not just the buildings, but trust between people. If I learned anything in that camp, it's that we're all human beneath our uniforms and flags. Through our window, I can see children playing in the rubble-strewn street, German and American soldiers working together to clear debris from a bombed building. Perhaps Klaus is right, perhaps from these ashes, something new and better can grow. Like the roses in our garden, beauty and hope can bloom even after the darkest winter. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.